So now your hand's always in front of you. A lot of people like to bring their hand back here and not turn their body. That's incorrect. You lose all control. You might hit the ball hard, but the odds that you land it on the table are slim. You can get the same power and everything with a lot more control by limiting your hand motion and using your body a lot more. So you're turning your body. Do you notice how my hand never, I'll show it like this so it's a bit easier for you guys. My hand never crosses this line, this imaginary line from my body here. It never goes back here. It always stays in front. So even when I'm turning my body here, it's always in line with that imaginary line. I'm never going back like this. And because of that, now I have all of this to control my hand. So now it doesn't look like this anymore. Now it comes all together. And the only difference between this and a regular topspin is really how back you go. Generally speaking, with the other opponent's topspinning to you and you have less time, you're not going to go back a lot. You're going to go back a little less, and it's going to be a much shorter, quicker movement. So, again, do you want to come help me out of it? Thanks. So I'm going to show you the difference between block and counter loop. So I'm going to block the first few, and then you're going to notice the difference when I decide to counter loop, all right? So just loop normally. You see that difference? Everything was just a bit bigger. That body turned a little more, and that was all. Other than that, it stays more or less the same. One more. That's the idea. And this way you can be aggressive without being risky. And that's generally, that's the whole goal, unless you're a chopper. Thanks. When I do backhand, I'll ask for you to come up again. So I've gone over most of the mechanics behind all that. One last thing is contact point on your racket, where you're hitting the ball and how you're hitting the ball. That depends on how much spin the opponent gives you. If the opponent's giving you something super spinny, then you'll close your racket more and you'll go more closed. But what a lot of people do, and doesn't generally work, is they keep the same angle throughout the entire shot. You don't want to keep the same angle. You want to transition from a open state to a more closed state. That way you're kind of giving a curve and you're ensuring that the ball is never going to hit the net. Which I know with topspin seems a little weird, like, oh, how can I put it in the net? It happens, especially if you're hitting the ball with that same angle, particularly if it's closed. If it's closed, even if the opponent gives you a bunch of topspin, you'll often see that you're putting it in the net. Change that just by starting a little more open and then finishing closed. That's why they call it a loop. The other thing is where you're hitting it on your racket. Generally, you want to hit it, so if you cut the racket up like that, somewhere here. So preferably that top corner right there. The further away you go from the handle, the more energy the racket has. And you do want to maximize your energy with you want to maximize the energy you're giving to the ball with the least energy expended by yourself. And you can do that by hitting it there. That's not easy, but when you're going to practice that, try and get for that point of contact. Now, backhand counter loop. Backhand counter loop it's a lot more similar to the backhand block than the forehand counter loop is to the forehand block. Because very rarely are you going to see people go back here and start to counter loop a backhand on someone else's forehand topspin. It's not realistic. So same thing, your body's the same. And again, the same way I told you guys that you're turning your body for your forehand, it's the same thing for your backhand, except now, and Matthew, we talked about this last time I was with you, it's your right shoulder that's kind of going in a bit. So instead of just this, where it's only your hand and your wrist and everything, now your right shoulder's going in, and you kind of unwind all of that at the end. Now this is quite complicated, so it's something that takes a lot of time to get, and I don't know if you're playing tournaments or something and you don't want to lose, or I wouldn't recommend doing this right away. Practice it quite a bit until you get the hang of it, and then slowly start to incorporate it into your game because it takes time. So all that here, the ball's coming to me. Let's say I'm blocking. He counter loops a little slower, that's my chance. Because you have to, a lot of this is judgment as well. You can't just decide to counter loop whatever the hell, whatever the heck you want. It's, you have to really judge how the ball's coming. If he gives you something super hard, you know, you're not gonna try and go even harder. That's probably a shot where you wanna block it, good placement, and then wait for the next ball. Likewise, if he gives you something pretty slow in a position where you're at, then you go for the counter loop. So a lot of that is seeing what he does and reacting to it. So for backhand, all that again, we're here. And the same way I told you that you unwind that all, make sure to unwind it forward. I forgot to mention that for forehand as well. A lot of people like to go sideways with forehand and with backhand. You're losing a lot of energy in going sideways. You might be giving a little more spin, but you're losing precision and energy. Everything you do, direct forward to where you want the ball to go. So let's say I'm going with my backhand and I want to hit it in the middle. I'm not going to go sideways like this because I don't know where the ball's going to end up. I'm going to go, I want the head of my racket to finish where I want the ball to go. That's a good rule to follow. So then you're back here. Everything's the same as block. You just put your elbow, you put your shoulder in here kind of. And now you just unwind everything. And that's the basic premise of that shot. One thing that you'll find hard though is adjusting the length. And by length I mean how far the ball hits on your table, whether it hits here or whether it hits here. For a shot like block, it's really easy to just move your right leg forward and then you're in position and now you're back and you're okay. For this shot, it requires a little more body. So it kind of requires you to jump back and forth with both of your legs for this. Like I said, so we've covered 4 shots: forehand block, backhand block, forehand counter spin, backhand counter spin. This is by far the hardest, and it's not and it's going to take time for these little details. That's the reason why. It's not because the actual shot is super hard. If I give you the ball always in one spot, you'll be able to learn it pretty quickly. But it's all these small adjustments that make it pretty tough, that are much easier with the rest of the shots. So now that we have those 4 shots, that's more or less what I wanted to cover. I want to go over a bit how you incorporate those in the game. So say, you know, I don't know how all of you play, but let's say you're someone that likes to let the other opponent attack first. A lot of people play like that, and then they decide to go for the block or counter after. Some people aren't comfortable looping bottom spin balls, so they let the opponent attack. If you're doing that, if you're that kind of player, you probably want to stay a bit farther from the table. Give yourself a little more time to react. Judge what's going on. Another thing, before I get into specifics actually, one more thing for everyone, whether you're someone that likes to attack first or likes to counter loop, it's where you're at the height at which you're hitting the ball for block and for counter loop. So for block, I had a coach who used to coach here in Ottawa many years ago, who said that the optimal height for blocking is a net and a half high. So a good way to judge that is, for most of your rackets, the net is about the height of this side of the racket. So that and another half racket is where you want to hit it for forehand and for backhand. That's ideal. That's the point at which the ball hasn't gotten too much spin. It hasn't accelerated to its peak yet, but you're not letting it drop all the way down here in your late every time. So that's that optimal, I'm hitting it when it's not too fast, not too slow height. And now for counter loop, you generally want to let it bounce just a little more because you often don't have time to hit it that early. So do you want to help me out just one more time? Thanks. So I'm going to show you the difference between the timings so you understand. Because these timings are quite early. They're not, I say net and a half, and you don't really have much of a reference for what that is, so I'll show you. So this is this is really, really late. I'm letting the ball bounce somewhere up here. This is 4 or 5 nets, who knows. The actual timing is something closer to this. So do you see how much closer I am to the table now? That's the timing. I know that varies. It's not always a net and a half. You can't be precise. But it's that general feeling. It's really, really fast. You don't wait for it to come back here to lose spin. Go one more time. A lot of people do. A lot of people block like this. And do you see how easy it is for him to kill that? He has so much time to go back, wind up and everything. If I hit it early here, he has a lot less time now. And he has a lot less time to react, and that gives me more time to react. Thanks again. So that's the general idea. So now into a few specifics before I guess we get to playing. So again, if you're a player that likes to attack, likes to counter loop, likes to let the other opponent attack, you want to stay a bit farther from the table. And then that timing that we talked about there is probably going to be slightly later, which is okay. If it's 2 nets, 2.5 nets, that's fine. The thing is, you always want to hit it on its way up. Ideally, you want a net and a half. I understand it's not always possible, but you want to go for it on its way up. Once it's dropped, that's way too late, and then you're basically lobbing the opponent the ball, and you're going to get killed. If you're someone who likes to attack first, meaning you're more aggressive, it's okay to stay a bit closer to the table. You know, maybe 2 rackets away. So about 1.5 foot away from the table. If you really like to take the attack and everything, because then that gives you a lot more time and a lot more opportunities to take the ball at that net and a half bounce that we were talking about. But that's, you have to be pretty fast for that. And I know a lot of you like to tend to stray away from the table a bit. So I'd imagine for most of you, you want to stay somewhere here, about 1 meter from the table. That's that optimal distance where you're still hitting the ball on the way up, but you're giving yourself enough time to react. So that's more or less it. I mean, if I had to summarize this in a few short, I guess, points for you to take away whenever you're playing, it would be the stance is first and foremost. Keep that left leg forward, forehand and backhand. So you're more or less parallel to the table. This is always above, your hand is always above your elbow, forehand and backhand. These 2 fingers are very important. A lot of people don't use them. Don't be those people, use them. And then the rest is coordinating your body with your hand. And that's for the block, for the counter loop. Just remember, your hand isn't what generates the power, it's your body. It's your body and where you contact it on the racket. So you're not taking the ball and wailing on it with just your hand. You're keeping your hand controlled here, and it's your body that does all the twisting and turning. Thank you for listening to me. I appreciate your time. If you guys have any questions, now is the time. Anyone at all, anything. No stupid questions.
What do you watch for your opponent to tell you the next shot that has to be a block?
That comes off the judgment of what you gave the opponent. So you should know how you gave that ball. If you gave the ball something like this, chances are he's going to go for an attack, and then it's probably better to just keep your hand in front of you and block the ball. However, if you hit something like this, chances are he's the one blocking, and then you can go for the aggressive attack. So a lot of that's judgment off of what you gave him the previous ball. And then, of course, where he is in relation to the ball. Because sometimes you'll give a super great ball, but you're going to give it to him right where he is. And in that case, it did you no good to hit the ball hard because now he's just going to hit it harder and use your energy. So
Should you be ready to block like in between shots for like a fraction of a second before you make your move?
I wouldn't say ready to block necessarily, but you do have to be. Here, I'll say like this. Your hand's always in front of you no matter what. If the ball happens to come slow enough where you can attack, then it's just a simple twist and turn of the body. So, you know what? I would say yes, be expecting a block more so than an attack. Because often you're not going to have time, you're not going to be in position, the ball isn't going to come the way you want it to. And with block, you can always put it back strategically where he's not, or in his right hip here, so that you can play the next point. But being constantly ready for an attack means either you're very fast or very, very confident, I guess, because more times than not, you'll find yourself really, really late here if you're constantly giving yourself a bunch of energy, room to hit the ball hard, I guess.
Let's make this the last thing, unless there's questions. Is there a drill or an exercise you want people to do at the fitness when you get there?
There's plenty. The most basic thing, just someone counters, someone's looping and someone's blocking. That'll help for your block. For counter loop, what you can do is you're blocking someone's constantly back here looping. Take care. Someone's constantly here looping, you're blocking, then you're going to take over with your counter loop. And now you're going to continue looping while the other opponent does it. So that might sound a little confusing when I put it like that. So you want to help me one more time? So essentially you're going to loop and I'm going to block and then I'm going to counter. The moment I counter, I'm going to go back and I'm going to loop and you're going to block. And then whenever you want to, you counter, okay? So this is what the exercise looks like. So imagine I got that counter loop on. Now you come close to block. Now I'm the one that's... And now whenever he wants to, he can counter. And now I go close and block, and then I counter, and then he comes close, and it's a back and forth kind of, it's a back and forth report between both players. One person's blocking, one person's looping. You can do that with forehand and backhand. Another thing is one person loops from their forehand anywhere to the table, and the other person has to practice their block. That's really good for keeping on your toes and anticipating where the ball's coming. However, that can be very tough, especially if your opponent isn't completely, doesn't have total control over their topspin, because it's really, really tough to sometimes guess where the opponent's going to give the ball. So those two exercises are quite useful.
Backhand loop when you use the shoulder, you use also a lot of
Wrist.
like a slap attack.
Yes.
At the end.
At the end, it's just an extra method of giving energy to the ball. It's so I'm using my shoulder, I'm using my legs, I'm using my forearm. That wrist is kind of tied in with these two fingers. They all kind of work together. So I'm doing everything, and then at the end, it's just that little kick, that jerk, which gives it a little extra spin, a little extra speed. If you don't feel comfortable using that right away, that's fine. Just remember to keep your wrist loose. A lot of people really like to stiffen up their wrist. Don't. Just let it loose and do what feels natural. If you let it loose, eventually you'll get that. But if you stiffen it up from the start, it becomes much tougher to go back later and loosen it again and then learn that. So just from the start, even if you're not going to be using that wrist, just make sure it's loose. Any other questions? If you hit hard or if someone else hits hard.
So if someone else is hitting hard,
If someone else is hitting hard, it's okay to block it.
is that okay?
Well, I mean, well, if you're that good that you can counter loop it, I mean, go ahead. But most people just, if someone, like I said, that judgment that comes off of what the opponent's doing, if someone's hitting it super hard, you're generally going to go softer. Because you can't have two people going super hard. One of them's bound to miss right away. So if someone's hitting super hard, racket forward, just block it. And then if you block it in a strategic spot, let's say somewhere he's not, his right hip, something that makes him uncomfortable, chances are he's not going to go hard again. He's going to give you soft, and then you can go hard. So I would say if someone's giving hard, it's much better to block than to try and attack.
I think his block is just putting the racket there, it's not moving. You have to give a little bit, right? If you're not
It's never going to be a totally static shot. It's never just going to be your racket there. Unless you're playing against, I don't know who, one of the top players in the world. They're hitting that hard, in which case, yeah, you're just going to put your racket there. But for a level that you'll see here, you can always go a bit. No one's hitting it that hard. If you don't feel comfortable at the start, I mean, sure, you can just put your hand there. But you'll notice more often than not that the ball is just going to go in the net. You need a little bit to make sure that the ball is going over the net.
For the backhand and forehand blocking, if you wanted to direct that to one side or the other, is it just a matter of changing the angle of the racket?
That's a good question.
Or do you do the body as well?
I didn't cover that. It's a mix of both. You have to change your racket angle a bit, but it's also adjusting your legs and your body as well. So let's say I'm playing here for my forehand. My legs are like this and my hand's like this. It's pretty straightforward, basic. But if I want to give it to the person's backhand, so I'm trying to give it parallel, my right leg does have to move back a little. And I have to orientate my body there now. And then obviously you're adjusting what you do with your hand just a bit. But if you keep your legs like this, and then you try and give it there, you're going to see yourself just doing this with your hand. So yeah, you do want to definitely bring your right leg back a little and turn your hips a little so that you're facing that direction in general. Same thing with backhand. With backhand, you don't have to adjust your legs as much, it's more so your body. And that's because generally with your backhand, you're not using as much body as you are with your forehand. It's a little more hand. So let's say for your backhand, you're like this. If you're playing to the other person's backhand, you can move your right leg forward a bit if you want to make it a little more level a little more even with the table when you're playing that shot. But it's generally you're turning your hips like that a little more so you're oriented there. You want to face the way where you're giving it. That's the, I guess, called a rule of thumb. Any more questions or? All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. You have a bunch of tables.